What does Belly want? This is the monumental question of The Summer I Turned Pretty. For much of the show's story, it focuses on what the main character, Belly Conklin, wants. The show, after all, is ultimately about a love triangle. Even a lot of the show's marketing is about who Belly chooses in the end. What does Belly want out of her own life? Who is she going to choose? These are the questions that drive the story forward. And in this video, I aim to carefully examine Belly's character and take a look at how Belly and what she wants grows and changes throughout the series, culminating in the pivotal choices that she makes. And for that, I'll have to talk about the show in its entirety, so spoilers for The Summer I Turned Pretty and other pieces of media as well. And with that out of the way, we ask the question, who is Belly Conklin? And that's the thing. We don't know. If you watch my previous videos, I always go into who each character is, but Belly is a bit of an enigma, because for much of the story, Belly herself doesn't even know who she is. So when asking her what does she want, we have to define what exactly a want is. Simply put, it's a character's desire that they wish to achieve, but for the purpose of a narrative, it's what drives the story forward. This is why establishing desires early on in a story is the norm for most narratives. For example, in musicals, there's a term called the I want song, and these are typically placed very early on in the story because they establish the character's motivators. In The Little Mermaid, it's part of your world. In Mulan, it's reflection, and in Tangled, it's when will my life begin. And now that these motivations have been established for the audience, the plot can then progress. Ariel wants to experience the surface world, so she makes a deal with Ursula. Mulan wants to protect her family's honor while also escaping her expectations as a woman in ancient China, so she joins the army in her aging father's stead, and Rapunzel wants to see the floating lights up close and leave the tower for the first time in her life, so she escapes with Flynn Rider. And minus the music, Jenny Han does the same thing with The Summer I Turned Pretty. The very first scene of the show, after the initial monologue, is Belly in her room getting ready for another summer at Cousins, and it's revealed that she has a crush on Conrad Fisher. So it's a crush. She wants Conrad. It sounds simple, but there's a lot of layers that we can unravel as this video goes on. But to properly get into this, we have to examine Belly throughout her seasons. Season 1 is the summer she turned pretty, the summer that set all the events in motion. And like I said earlier, she really only had one thing on her mind going into it: Conrad Fisher, her first love. But why does Belly like Conrad? Well, as we've seen throughout the story, Conrad has always been protective of Belly, looking out for her and making her feel included and cared for when the other boys didn't. In short, Conrad made Belly feel special, even before her glow up. But the question is, how much of Belly's feelings are really her own? Because like I said in my last video, there is a third party in the relationship, and I'm not talking about Jeremiah. I'm talking about Susanna. Because practically from birth, Susanna had been pushing the idea that Belly would one day marry one of her sons, and I love that the finale of the show directly addresses this elephant in the room. For most of her life, Belly has been following a path that other people laid out for her and played a supporting role in the lives of everyone else. In Season 1, Belly is just barely her own character, and thus follows the whims of those who are more influential, whether it's Susanna, the rich girls of Cousins, or even her popular friend Taylor. Season 1 Belly just doesn't have a path in life yet, so she chooses to please those around her, agreeing to become a debutante even if those closest to her say that it's out of character. And we really see that Belly has yet to develop a strong sense of personal conviction just yet in episode 3 of this season, Summer Nights. In this episode, Belly celebrates her 16th birthday, and culturally, the Sweet 16 is a significant age for young American women. This age marks the shift from childhood to young adulthood, and the kids attend a house party. And though she's in attendance with one of her closest friends in Taylor, upon entering the venue, Belly goes along with her cool new friends instead of her. And to Taylor, it appears that Belly is slowly becoming the version of herself that Susanna wants her to be, rather than the version that she knows. But parts of Belly's real personality seem to seep through this season, particularly in episode 6. After just having accepted Jeremiah's feelings the previous episode, Belly benches him for the athletically superior Conrad. That's because Belly loves the challenge and she loves to win. This is something that's probably rooted in her growing up as the youngest in a group of children, as well as being a girl surrounded by boys. Thus, Belly always had something to prove, and her competitiveness developed into one of her key defining traits. But as competitive as she is, when she sees Conrad making out with Nicole, another girl from Cousins whom he took to the dev ball the previous year, she practically rolls over and finds someone else in Cam Cameron. And this begs the question, why? If Belly is competitive, if she really wanted Conrad, wouldn't she have fought for him in some way? Why did she seemingly move on from Conrad that same night and substitute him for Cam for the moment she realized she couldn't get with him? Did she even really want Conrad? Well, yes, but actually, no. Because here's the thing about wants. They're active pursuits. They're something you have to think about and work towards if you want to achieve them. But you can have a want without ever achieving it, and you can still be happy all the same. And in that same vein, Belly didn't get Conrad until the end of season 1, but I wouldn't go as far as to say that she wasn't happy for most of that summer. So instead of asking what Belly wants, we instead need to ask, what does Belly need? Because needs are different, they're internal, and they exist even without our cognition fully realizing them. And if you want to be happy, you need to make sure that your needs are met. So while Belly might say that she wants Conrad, and we see her head over heels for him, we've also seen that she can live without him. In fact, they spend most of season 1 apart from each other. So what does Belly really need in this season? If not Conrad, it's simple. Attention. For most of Belly's life, she's been invisible, a supporting character. At school, she's Taylor's best friend, and at Cousins, she's just good old Belly. But this summer, she wants to make an impression and be seen not as Belly Conklin, the childhood friend, but Belly Conklin, a young woman. And that's why she agrees to join the Deb Ball, because she wants to be seen not as the girl that people knew growing up, but as a woman ready for the world. She clashes with Taylor because she's finally growing an ego of her own, which isn't a bad thing. She plays her damn heart out during the volleyball tournament because she wants to be the best. Like any woman who comes of age, Belly just wants to be seen, to be acknowledged that she exists, to be looked at lovingly by someone, anyone, because for most of her life, she had been seemingly invisible. That's why she so willingly accepts Cameron's pursuit at first, then Jeremiah's, and then Conrad at the end, because they finally see her in a way that she's been wanting to be seen, to be looked at for years. They finally see that she is pretty. But there is always another need that must be met. Which brings us to season 2. And this season's Belly is in a number of ways different, because remember that we ended last season with everything that Belly had wanted. Conrad and Belly sharing a kiss, Susanna agreeing to take chemotherapy, and seemingly everything else going right, but it all goes so horribly wrong. Susanna dies, which greatly affects everyone, especially her sons. Laurel practically shuts down, and we see that she was barely there for Belly and Steven while they were grieving as well. Meanwhile, Conrad can barely process her death, which leads him to being a not very good boyfriend to Belly. But we see, most of all, how Susanna's death heavily affects Belly herself. Her grades plummet, she gets booted from the varsity volleyball team, her boyfriend abandons her, her childhood friend cuts all contact with her, she lost an aunt figure, and her own mother was barely around for the past few months, and after all of that, her older brother has the gall to blame her for ruining their relationship with the Fishers. And then she gets the news that the beach house, her favorite place in the entire world, is going to disappear, and she'll never get to have her magical summers there ever again. In season 2, Belly is going through it. Everything that Belly has loved, that she's known, is falling apart. And it's in this season where Belly's inner desires shift. She's no longer after that attention that she craved for when she was younger. Belly in this season is afraid, and she needs someone who can alleviate that fear. Somebody who can help her through these troubling times and help her laugh again. And that's ultimately the reason she chooses Jeremiah. Because at this point in the story, Jeremiah gives Belly a sense of stability. He makes things easier for Belly, whether it's through their telepathy and special connection, or just the fact that it's Jeremiah that helps Belly forget all her problems and fears, which we see during the Tower of Terror scene in this season. It's an absolutely crazy time, and she just needs someone whom she can lean on as she dives headfirst into adulthood. And for those purposes, Jeremiah is that guy.
Because Jer's the golden one. He's funny, gregarious, and doesn't take life too seriously. Belly probably needed more of that energy in her life, considering the summer that she's had this season. Especially considering that Conrad's the one that pushes Belly away. And in spite of him claiming to love her so much, he's also the one that hurt her the most. Because the fact of the matter is that he was in no position to love Belly himself. At least until season 3. So now 4 years have gone by with Jeremiah and Belly being together as a couple, and she's achieved everything that she's ever wanted. But this season introduces a new need for Belly. That of self-actualization. See, for most of her life, Belly's been fixated on falling in love and choosing one of the Fisher brothers, and she's finally achieved it, having a steady, solid relationship with Jeremiah despite his shortcomings. But Belly's finally asking herself the harder questions. Who is she? And what does she want? But it's also worth noting that at this point in the story, it's been a while since Susanna passed away. In fact, she's barely mentioned in season 3 as compared to the last one, and I think that's intentional. It shows that Susanna's influence, in spite of how powerful it was in the previous seasons, is slowly beginning to fade as time goes by and the characters move on with their lives. And after finally having achieved a loving relationship with one of the Fisher boys, she starts to wonder, what else is there? She thinks about her career, her future, seeing the world, things that she's never really thought of before. But that all comes to a halt when her older brother gets into an accident, causing her to focus on preserving what is rather than pursuing what could be. When her older brother almost dies, she throws herself even deeper into the arms of what she knows in fear of the worst. But that comes at the cost of knowing who she really is, because if she marries Jer, she'll only end up fulfilling Susanna's wishes for her, marry one of her sons and inherit the magical beach house. But Belly, after having gone through college, starts to ask if there's more to life outside the sleepy summer town of Cousins, Massachusetts. And when the wedding doesn't go through, we ultimately see Belly live her best life in Paris and become completely unrecognizable from the young woman whom we started the series off with, but still very much beautiful. Belly needed to learn that she could stand on her 2 legs and become her own person and find out what she could be without relying on anyone, and she did just that. But here's the thing with becoming who you are. No matter what you do with your present, you can never truly outrun the past. Everything you've ever had, everyone you've ever loved, you'll carry your memories of them wherever you go. And even if the past isn't always pretty, it did mold you into who you are today. And that's why season 3 Belly actually had 2 different needs. For the first chunk of the season, it's self-actualization. She needed to outgrow Susanna's influence, to see what the world is like beyond just cousins, and finally become her own person. And when she finally achieves that, she realizes she needs something else. To forgive her past. Because let's be clear, Belly isn't just in Paris to find herself. That's a lie that she so desperately needs herself to believe. She's also in Paris because she's trying to escape her past and the many consequences of her actions. She's trying to escape facing Jeremiah, whose heart she shattered, Conrad, whom she has complicating feelings for, and the fallout of her running away from her wedding. Belly harbors anger, even a little bit of resentment for her past self, for making so many dumb decisions, for allowing herself to be so easily influenced by Susanna, for everything bad that has ever happened to her. She even claims to Conrad that she's the villain. Belly seeks validation in Paris, that whatever she did wasn't so bad and that she's capable of moving on and building a life despite her shortcomings. But she never truly forgave herself for all her mistakes. She avoids coming back home for so long despite her missing her family, her mother especially. She insists on staying in Paris even if it kills her inside. But despite her feelings, Belly didn't go home. Because to go home would mean to face your past. And Belly simply wasn't ready yet to forgive that part of herself. And I think her spending so much time in Paris made her realize how much she longed for home. Even in the finale, when she was showing Conrad around, it may have looked like Belly loved Paris, but even with all the sights that the city had and all of its rich history and culture, Belly didn't really seem in love with the city. At least, not the way that she loved Cousins. Her favorite spot in the city was a place she would escape to when she'd be overwhelmed by her problems. Ironically, her favorite spot in Paris was an escape from the real Paris. A place where she could look at the caricature of a city while experiencing none of its cruel truths. And while she did eventually find comfort, it took a long time, and while she felt at home in Paris, she never fell in love with it. She doesn't stick her head out the window when taking the sights the same way she would on the drive to the cousin's house. She took Conrad to all the tourist spots like a checklist rather than places he'd experienced the real Paris. And while she was doing so, she barely cracked a smile while experiencing it, which she would do all the time with cousins, no matter how many summers she'd spent there. Belly thought that forgiving herself meant moving on and falling in love with a new city. She thought that growing meant reinventing yourself, getting a haircut, and saying that you've changed. But that's not necessarily how growth works. There's a really important flashback in season 3, where Susanna tells a much younger version of Belly that she might want to see the world when she grows older. But Belly rejects the idea, saying that she doesn't want that, and that she would rather swim with Susanna every day. And then Susanna smiles and says that Belly always knew what she wanted. Belly was always her own person. It's just somewhere along the line she got caught up in everybody else's expectations. Susanna wanted her to be the perfect daughter-in-law and debutante. Taylor wanted her to remain the same old Belly, her partner in crime and sidekick. Jeremiah wanted her to be his perfect wife. Laurel wanted her to not be Jeremiah's perfect wife. Belly had assumed so many roles pushed onto her by so many people that she didn't even know who she was anymore. And this represents reality, because throughout life, nobody is ever just one thing. You're going to assume so many different roles and have to wear masks and work with all kinds of people. And Belly disappointed a number of the people in her life because she wasn't able to play those roles perfectly. But she needed to escape from it all and rediscover that young child who could disagree with Susanna and stand up for herself. But in that process of rediscovering the fighter within herself, she grew to resent the Belly that made all those mistakes. Because to Belly, the version of her that tore a family apart and ran away from a wedding was a person she didn't want to be anymore. Because she believed that that version of her was not worthy of love. And that's where she's wrong. Because for all her faults, Belly was just a young girl, lost and confused. And while she did make some mistakes and face the consequences for them, she never stopped being worthy of love. Because Conrad was the one who never stopped showing Belly that she was worth loving. When she was imperfect, he loved her. When she was about to make the biggest mistake of her life, he loved her. When he thought that they would never speak to each other again, he loved her. And he didn't show this love through some tiny ring or extravagant proposal. He did it in its truest form, because love is an act of extending oneself for the well-being of another without any expectation in return. It was Conrad who took what little free time he had as a medical student to handwrite letters to Belly, even if she never responded. It was Conrad who went out of his way to visit Belly in a city he'd never been to, with no guarantee that she'd even entertain him. And it was Conrad who gave Belly what she had really been wanting for her birthday: a piece of home and a reminder that she'll always have cousins. It's this love that Conrad never stopped feeling, and sharing this love with Belly, that allowed her to finally reconcile with her past. It showed her that someone whom she had hurt so deeply was ready to forgive her and give her love in spite of everything that happened. And it showed that she could probably do the same. And that's the kind of love that Belly needed to forgive herself. A love that's beautiful, golden, and infinite.